Chioma walked into the glittering Lagos hotel beside her husband Tund, her heart full of hope for their 5th anniversary dinner. She had imagined a night filled with love, laughter, and memories, but from the moment they entered the lavish hall, she noticed how different Tund carried himself. He straightened his shoulders, adjusted his designer suit, and moved like a man eager to show off. His colleagues were already seated, and he introduced himself with pride, speaking loudly as if the evening was his personal stage. When Chioma smiled shyly at the group, Tund smirked and brushed her off, saying she wasn't polished enough for the high-class crowd he now mingled with. As the waiter brought menus, Chioma quietly asked for a simple meal she had always loved. Instead of supporting her choice, Tund burst out laughing, calling her a village girl who didn't understand luxury dining. His voice carried across the room, and a few of his friends chuckled. The words stung, but Chioma lowered her eyes and stayed calm, refusing to let the insult break her. When the glasses were filled for a toast, Tund stood, raising his champagne high. With a sly grin, he declared that marrying Chioma had been his greatest act of charity. The guests erupted in laughter, while she sat silently, her hands folded, her face a mask of quiet strength hiding the storm raging inside. Just as the humiliation seemed unbearable, the hotel manager appeared at the table, holding a sealed envelope. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Chioma. With a respectful bow, he addressed her as Mrs. Chioma Adeyemi, and handed her the letter. The atmosphere shifted instantly, whispers spreading among the guests. When the manager announced that Chioma was in fact the legal owner of the very hotel they were sitting in, having inherited it from her late uncle, the room froze. Gasps filled the air, and every eye turned to her in shock. Staff quickly adjusted, treating her with reverence, offering warm smiles and bowing in respect. Tund stood speechless, his pride shattered, his face pale with disbelief. Chioma rose slowly, thanked everyone for attending, and in a calm yet firm voice told Tund that if he could not value her, he was free to leave. Security stepped forward, gently guiding him away as the crowd watched in stunned silence. What began as a night of mockery ended with Chioma standing tall, the woman once dismissed as unworthy now revealed as the powerful owner, her dignity shining brighter than all the lights in the room. Tund walked into the hotel's grand hall with a wide grin, his arm loosely around Chioma, as though she was only there to complete his picture. His colleagues were already gathered, glasses in hand, waiting to greet him. He puffed out his chest, shaking hands, laughing loudly, and speaking as if the whole night belonged to him. He told stories about his business deals, his new car, and the trips he had taken abroad, making sure everyone heard every detail. While Chioma sat quietly at the table, smiling politely, Tund leaned closer to his friends and whispered loudly enough for her to hear that his wife was too simple for the kind of life he now lived. He told them she was not classy enough, and that he needed to work hard so she could catch up with his new status. His words brought smirks and giggles from those around, and instead of defending his wife, he joined in, enjoying the mockery. Chioma lowered her eyes, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her glass. She had dressed neatly for the evening, wearing the gown she carefully chose, but his constant belittling made her feel invisible. Each time she tried to join the conversation, Tund cut her off, turning the spotlight back to himself. He bragged about how much he had done for her, painting himself as a generous husband who had taken a quiet, modest woman and given her access to wealth and comfort. Some of his friends laughed and nodded, while others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty behind his tone. Still, Tund basked in their attention, eager to prove he had risen far above the woman sitting beside him. When the waiter arrived with menus, Tund snatched his quickly, making grand choices and boasting about knowing the finest wines. Chioma, with a soft smile, requested something simple she had always enjoyed, but instead of respecting her taste, he threw his head back and laughed. "You see what I mean?" he told his colleagues, pointing at her plate before it even arrived. "She still eats like a village girl. Not classy enough for this life." The words cut deep, but Chioma swallowed her pain, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She sat still, her calm presence glowing in contrast to his arrogance, unaware that before the night ended, the same crowd laughing with him would be staring at her with awe and respect. The waiter leaned forward with a polite smile, ready to take their orders. Chioma looked at the menu, her fingers brushing over the names of expensive dishes she didn't recognize. Instead of pretending, She gently asked for a simple meal, something she had always loved and felt comfortable with. Her voice was soft but clear, and she hoped the evening would carry on peacefully. But Tun slammed his palm on the table and burst into laughter that echoed across the hall. He tilted his head toward his colleagues and pointed at her. "Did you hear that?" he shouted, loud enough for every guest nearby to notice. "This woman still eats like a village girl. She doesn't even know how to order a proper dish." His friends chuckled, some covering their mouths, while others openly joined in, fueling his arrogance. Chioma froze for a moment, her cheeks burning, but she forced a small smile, hiding the sting in her chest. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond, glancing between the embarrassed wife and the mocking husband. Tund, enjoying the attention, leaned back in his chair and kept talking. He told the table how much effort it took to teach her the ways of city life, making her sound like a burden he had carried out of pity. He claimed he had invested in her, like some project, and now she was sitting there proving him right in front of everyone. The laughter around her grew louder, and the sound felt like sharp needles piercing her dignity. Guests at nearby tables turned their heads, some whispering, others smirking, watching the humiliation unfold. Chioma clasped her hands together under the table, her eyes fixed on the glass of water before her. She stayed quiet, her calmness almost unsettling in the middle of the mockery. Tun mistook her silence for weakness and raised his voice again, making another cruel joke about how marrying her had been his greatest act of generosity. But while he laughed, Chioma's stillness spoke louder than his words. She carried herself with a quiet strength, refusing to answer insult with insult. Though her heart ached, she knew storms did not last forever. The same people laughing would soon witness a truth so powerful it would silence every voice in that room and turn their laughter into shock. Tund lifted his glass high, the golden champagne sparkling under the hotel lights. A sly grin spread across his face as he tapped the rim, calling for attention. The room grew quieter, all eyes on him, waiting for his words. He cleared his throat dramatically, pretending to look serious. Then with a mocking smile he declared, "To my biggest charity work, marrying her." He tilted his head toward Chioma, who sat silently beside him. For a second there was silence, and then laughter erupted around the table. His colleagues clapped, some doubling over in amusement, others shaking their heads while sipping their drinks. The cruel joke spread quickly, and even guests from nearby tables leaned closer, curious about the commotion. Chioma's heart thudded, but she kept her face calm, her lips pressed into a thin line. Inside, she felt her dignity stripped away piece by piece, yet she refused to let tears fall. She sat still, shoulders straight, her eyes lowered but her silence powerful. Tund, mistaking her quietness for weakness, basked in the attention. He took another sip, enjoying the echo of laughter, and continued boasting about how he had raised her into the world of wealth and status. He described himself as the man who had taken a plain woman and turned her into someone who could sit at such a grand table, twisting her identity into the punchline of his story. The sound of glasses clinking and laughter filled the air like a cruel chorus, but a few faces in the crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Not everyone found it funny. Some stared at Chioma, surprised by her calm composure in the middle of public humiliation. The waiter standing nearby looked away, ashamed on her behalf, while the hotel staff whispered among themselves, shocked by the insult. Chioma held her silence like armor, her mind steady though her heart ached. She knew storms did not last forever, and a change was near. While her husband mocked her before strangers, she carried the weight of a truth none of them yet knew. Soon, the same people laughing would see a different side of her, one that would silence the noise, strip Tund of his false pride, and turn the woman he called his charity work into the most respected figure in the room. Though humiliated, Chioma sat gracefully at the long table, her hands resting gently on her lap, her face calm despite the storm swirling inside her. Every laugh that followed her husband's cruel words cut deeply, but she refused to let her pain show. She kept her head high, her lips pressed together, and her eyes soft, as though nothing could shake her spirit. People around expected her to cry, to argue, or even to walk out, but she did none of that. Instead, her silence spoke louder than any words could. She carried herself with a quiet strength that made some of the guests look at her twice, wondering how she managed to sit with such poise while being treated so harshly. Tund continued to laugh and boast, enjoying the attention, not realizing that his behavior was revealing more about him than about her. He mistook her calmness for weakness, believing she was too timid to defend herself. Yet the longer she stayed silent, the more the atmosphere began to shift. A few of his friends stopped laughing, their eyes settling on Chioma, who remained untouched by the noise. Her stillness felt powerful, almost regal, and slowly, whispers spread across the room. Some people admired her composure, while others began to see Tun's arrogance for what it truly was. Inside, Chioma's heart ached. She remembered all the sacrifices she had made for him, the love she had given freely, and the trust she had once placed in him. Now, in front of strangers, he had turned her into a joke. But instead of letting bitterness consume her, she reminded herself that dignity was worth more than applause. She stayed calm because she knew storms eventually pass, and truth always finds its way to the surface. The waiter refilled her glass, giving her a small, sympathetic smile, as though he understood her pain. Chioma nodded gently, her eyes soft but unreadable. She was not just enduring. She was waiting. Deep within her, she carried knowledge that no one in the room yet knew. While Tun believed he was the star of the evening, the real light was hidden inside the woman he mocked. Soon, her silence would break in the most powerful way, and the same people laughing now would rise to honor her. The hotel manager stepped into the hall with steady steps, his presence instantly drawing attention. He was holding a sealed envelope in his hand, his eyes scanning the room as though searching for someone important. The laughter from the table slowed when he approached, and the guests turned to see what was happening. Tun straightened in his chair, expecting the attention to fall on him, certain the manager was coming to honor him or his business partners. But instead of greeting Tun, the manager bowed politely and addressed Chioma with respect. "Good evening, Mrs. Chioma Adeyemi," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the hall. The words caused a ripple of confusion. Heads turned, whispers began, and even Tun frowned, unsure of what was going on. Chioma looked up, surprised, her calm face still holding steady. The manager extended the envelope to her with both hands, as though delivering something of great importance. Tun chuckled nervously and tried to wave it off. "You must be mistaken," he said quickly. "That's my wife, she doesn't handle such things. Give it to me." But the manager shook his head firmly, his respect fixed on Chioma. "I'm sorry, sir," he replied, "but this is for Mrs. Adeyemi alone." The room grew tense, curiosity spreading among the guests. Some leaned forward in their chairs, eager to see what was inside. Others whispered to each other, wondering why the manager would bypass Tun to address his quiet wife. Tun's pride began to slip, his forced smile growing thinner as he watched his wife receive the envelope with calm hands. Chioma accepted it gracefully, her face still serene, though her heart beat faster with each second. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time that evening, Tun's loud voice was no longer the center of attention. Instead, every eye in the room was on Chioma. The man who had spent the night mocking her now looked unsettled, his confidence cracking as the manager stepped back and bowed once more. The guests could sense something important was unfolding, something none of them expected. Chioma held the envelope gently, her composure unshaken, while the crowd waited for the truth that would change the entire evening in front of everyone. The manager cleared his throat and unfolded the letter. The hall fell silent, all eyes fixed on Chioma. With a respectful tone, he announced that the luxury hotel they were dining in was legally owned by Mrs. Chioma Adeyemi. His words echoed through the room, causing a wave of gasps. Some guests dropped their glasses in shock, while others stared wide-eyed at the quiet woman they had just seen mocked by her husband. Tun's smile froze on his face, the color draining as he struggled to process what had just been said. The same wife he had ridiculed as not classy enough was, in fact, the rightful owner of the building around them. The manager explained that Chioma had inherited the property from her late uncle, a respected businessman who had left the hotel in her care. His words carried weight, and the truth could not be denied. Staff members immediately shifted their behavior, turning their attention to Chioma, bowing respectfully, and waiting for her response. The once ignored woman was now the most important person in the room. Whispers spread quickly, the laughter from earlier replaced with awe and surprise. Guests leaned toward one another, murmuring about how gracefully she had sat through the insults without revealing her true position. Some shook their heads at Tund, whose arrogance now looked foolish. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His pride had shattered, and his voice failed him. Chioma, still calm, lifted her head and looked around the room. Her silence had carried her through humiliation, but now her truth spoke louder than anything. She did not gloat, nor did she rush to explain. Instead, she sat tall, allowing the shock to settle in. The weight of her husband's cruel words now turned back on him, making him the subject of quiet ridicule. The atmosphere changed completely. What began as a stage for Tun's pride had transformed into a moment of triumph for Chioma. She no longer looked like the woman mocked for being simple. She now stood revealed as the true power in the room, the rightful queen of the very place where she had been belittled. The crowd gasped so loudly that the sound filled the entire hall. People who had been laughing only minutes earlier now sat frozen in disbelief, their eyes locked on Chioma. The woman they thought was powerless had suddenly become the most important figure in the room. Waiters and staff who once ignored her hurried forward with respect, bowing slightly, their faces full of admiration. They offered her fresh glasses, adjusted her seat, and stood by as though awaiting her command. The entire atmosphere shifted, and it was clear the balance of power now belonged to her. Tund, on the other hand, sat stiffly in his chair, his hands gripping the table as if it were the only thing holding him upright. His mouth opened but no words came out. The arrogance that had carried him all night drained away, leaving him pale and trembling. He looked around, hoping for support, but the same colleagues who had laughed at his cruel jokes now avoided his eyes. Their attention was fixed on Chioma, the woman he had mocked, now revealed as the owner of the hotel he had been so eager to flaunt in. Chioma lifted her head slowly, her calm face glowing with quiet strength. She had said nothing, yet every gesture from the staff showed she was the one in control. Guests whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads at the dramatic turn of events. They admired her composure, realizing that her silence earlier had not been weakness but dignity. The respect in the room belonged to her now, and every moment made her presence more powerful. Tund shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He wanted to stand to explain but he couldn't. The shame pinned him to his seat. The man who had once enjoyed mocking his wife now sat as the object of hidden ridicule. Even his closest friends leaned away from him, as if embarrassed to be connected to his pride. Chioma remained steady, her grace making the moment unforgettable. The people who once laughed at her dish and her simplicity were now staring at her with admiration. Power had changed hands without her even raising her voice. In that single moment, Tund's pride crumbled, and Chioma's strength shone brighter than every light in the hall. Chioma rose slowly from her seat, her gown flowing elegantly as the entire hall watched in silence. She lifted her chin and gave a gentle smile before speaking with a calm, steady voice. She thanked the guests for coming to the celebration, her words graceful and warm, as though nothing that had happened earlier had shaken her. Her tone carried authority yet kindness, and the respect in the room grew even stronger. People leaned forward, eager to hear what she would say next. Then she turned her eyes toward Tund, who sat stiff and pale, still unable to recover from the shock. Her voice remained calm, but it carried a weight that no one could ignore. She told him plainly that if he could not value her, he was free to leave her side. There was no anger in her tone, only strength and finality. The words hung in the air like a sharp blade, cutting through the silence. Gasps echoed once again, and all attention shifted from her grace to his shame. Tund's lips trembled as he tried to form words, but nothing came. The man who had mocked her all evening now sat powerless, trapped in his own disgrace. He reached out weakly as if to stop her, but before he could say anything, the hotel security team stepped forward. With the utmost respect toward Chioma, they moved to his side and gently but firmly asked him to leave. The crowd watched as he was escorted away, his once boastful stride replaced with slow, defeated steps. Whispers filled the room, guests shaking their heads in disbelief at how quickly the night had turned. Some admired Chioma for her dignity, others quietly criticized Tund for his arrogance, but all agreed they had never witnessed such a dramatic shift of power in a single evening. Chioma stood tall, unbothered by the stares, her calm presence shining brighter than any jewel. The same people who once laughed at her were now clapping softly, some even bowing slightly as a gesture of respect. Tund had walked in believing the night belonged to him, but he left in disgrace, while Chioma claimed her rightful place as the woman of honor. Her voice had been steady, her decision firm, and the consequences clear for everyone to see. The evening ended with Chioma standing tall in the center of the grand hall, her presence commanding every eye in the room. The same woman who had been mocked as a village girl now stood revealed as the true owner of the hotel, her dignity shining brighter than the glittering chandeliers above. Guests who had laughed earlier now gazed at her with admiration, whispering about her strength, her calmness, and the shocking turn of events they had just witnessed. Some applauded softly, others nodded with deep respect, realizing they had underestimated the quiet woman beside Tund. Chioma's face carried no prideful smirk, only a calm glow of confidence. She had endured humiliation without breaking, and now she carried victory without arrogance. The staff surrounded her, bowing respectfully and offering their service with smiles that reflected genuine admiration. The same waiters who had watched her suffer insults earlier now treated her like the most honored guest of the night. The hall that once echoed with cruel laughter now hummed with reverence for her. Tund was gone, escorted out in shame, and his absence only made her strength more visible. People whispered about how power could shift so quickly, how grace could defeat arrogance, and how silence could speak louder than words. Some of his colleagues shook their heads, embarrassed that they had joined in his mockery, while others secretly admired Chioma for teaching them a lesson without raising her voice. Chioma took a slow breath and smiled warmly at the guests, her posture straight, her spirit unshaken. She thanked them once more for attending, her voice steady and kind, leaving no trace of bitterness. The room filled with applause, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect. Everyone knew they had just witnessed a story that would be remembered and retold for years. A story of humiliation turned into honor, of silence turned into strength, of a woman once dismissed rising as queen of the night. As the lights glittered and music filled the background again, Chioma walked with grace, her gown trailing behind her like a crown of victory. She no longer looked like the woman mocked minutes before. She looked like a symbol of resilience, a woman who had faced disgrace but ended the night as the true queen in her own house. Hi, friends, sparkling heart, thanks for staying till the end. Glowing star, don't forget to like, thumbs up, share love letter, and subscribe bell for more amazing stories. See you in the next one. Waving hand sparkles.